All right, welcome. Today, we're going to follow this incredible chain of events. Seriously, it's wild. We're talking about how a king's messy divorce in the 1500s ended up creating a whole new society, an entire ocean away.
So yeah, that's the big question, right? How did one king's marriage problem literally change a continent? It sounds crazy, but the entire story of the Puritans in America, it really does kick off because one guy was just desperate to have a son. Let's dig into how this whole thing went down. Okay, so our story doesn't start in some quiet little church. Nope. We're heading straight to the lavish, over-the-top court of King Henry VIII. This is where a very personal problem is about to blow up into a full-blown religious revolution. So Henry was in a real bind. He'd married his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, but after all those years, they only had one kid who survived, a daughter, Mary. And for his dynasty, the Tudors, not having a male heir was a huge deal. Then Harry falls for Anne Boleyn and thinks, okay, this is my shot at getting a son. So in 1527, he asks the Pope to annul his marriage, but the Pope says no. Why? Well, he was pretty much under the thumb of Spain's king, who just happened to be Catherine's nephew. Talk about awkward. So, Henry's solution? He didn't just get a new wife. He decided to change the entire religious landscape of his country. He just breaks away from Rome, creates the Church of England, and puts himself in charge. Problem solved, right?
But, and this is the key part, this brand new Church of England, it was basically Catholicism with a new boss. You know, Catholic light. In 1539, they put out these 6 articles that pretty much confirmed it. Yeah, the Pope was out and the king was in, but the rituals, the doctrines, a lot of it was still the same. See, Henry was still a Catholic, deep down. And for this growing group of super passionate Protestants in England, this wasn't a reformation. It felt more like just a change in management. So all of Henry's personal trauma had this totally unintended side effect. It accidentally created a whole group of people who looked at his so-called Reformation and thought, you know what, this job is only half done. And they decided they were going to be the ones to finish it. And these folks were the Puritans. The name really says it all, doesn't it? They wanted to purify the Church of England, to scrub it clean of every last bit of Catholic influence. Now, this belief put them on a direct collision course with the monarchy, especially with King James I. He was a big believer in the divine right of kings, the idea that God put him on the throne, and he demanded that everyone conform to his church. So when the Puritans refused to fall in line, they were punished. We're talking fines, getting thrown in jail, all for practicing their faith their way. So you've got this constant persecution, right? For a small, really determined group of these Puritans, they looked around and realized there was really only one option left for them: get out, escape. But escaping was way harder than it sounds. Their first attempt, back in 1607, was a total disaster. A bunch of them just ended up in jail. A year later, though, a small group finally managed to slip away to Amsterdam. But they were looking for something a bit more stable. So in 1609, they moved to the city of Leiden in the Netherlands. And that's where they'd stay for over a decade, trying to build a life. So if they were safe in the Netherlands, why leave? Well, they were facing this double-edged sword, really. On one hand, there was a cultural problem. Their kids were they were becoming Dutch. They were picking up the language, the customs, and the parents were terrified they were losing their English identity and their faith. Then there was the economic problem. Life was tough. A lot of them were struggling to make a living, so much so that some even had to go back to England. They realized that if they wanted to keep their community together, they had to start somewhere fresh, somewhere isolated where they could build their perfect society. In that place, America. Okay, but here's something about that famous voyage that totally busts a common myth. We all picture the Mayflower as a ship full of pilgrims, right? Well, when it set sail in 1620, there were 102 passengers on board, but only 35 of them were actually from that Puritan group. The rest? They were just regular colonists, merchants, skilled workers. See, this whole thing wasn't just a religious journey. It was also a business deal. And having that mix of people on one small ship was about to create a major problem. So when they finally make it to the New World, there's a huge problem. They were blown way off course and missed their target, Virginia. This meant the official patent, their legal permission to settle, was basically useless. It was for a totally different place. So you have this boat full of religious separatists and secular colonists, and suddenly, nobody knows who's in charge. It's an instant crisis. And their solution was, it was kind of genius. They wrote up this short, simple contract that would literally go on to shape a continent. It all starts with this incredible phrase: to combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. Think about that.
This was a social contract. They were agreeing on how to govern themselves before they even stepped off the boat.
The Mayflower Compact really boiled down to three amazing ideas. First, they agreed to create their own government, this civil body politic, though they did it while still giving a nod to the king back in England. Second, and this was truly groundbreaking for the time, they decided it would all be based on majority rule. And third, everyone who put their name on that paper promised to obey the just and equal laws that they would create together, for the good of everyone. It's democracy in its infancy.
And just like that, this little document, written out of pure necessity on a ship in the middle of nowhere, becomes one of the very first blueprints for American democracy. It planted the seed for this radical idea that a government only gets its power from the people it governs. And that's a principle that would echo loud and clear almost 160 years later in the U.S. Constitution.
But, having a system for self-government is one thing. Surviving the brutal realities of this new land, that was another story entirely. And it couldn't prepare them for the incredibly complicated relationships they were about to form with the people who were already living there.
Their arrival was a mix of, well, a grim kind of luck and absolute tragedy. The place they chose to settle, Plymouth, was actually the site of a Patuxet village that had been completely wiped out by smallpox, a disease brought by earlier European ships. That horrifying fact is what allowed them to set up a town without being immediately attacked. But that first winter, it was just brutal. By the time spring arrived, only 47 of those 102 settlers were still alive. Think about that. More than half were gone. The death toll was so bad that even half of the Mayflower's own crew died before the ship could even sail back to England. Then, in the spring of 1621, the survivors managed to make a really important alliance with the local Wampanoag tribe and their leader, a chief named Massasoit. But right at the very heart of their agreement was this fatal misunderstanding. The Wampanoags thought they were signing a treaty of friendship, a mutual defense pact. The English settlers, on the other hand, interpreted it like a property deed. They thought the Native Americans were basically handing over their land, and that huge difference in what they thought they were agreeing to, well, it planted the seeds for all the conflict that was to come.
And that conflict didn't take long to explode. The peace just crumbled. Only 15 years after that treaty, the Pequot War broke out. And then, by 1675, it was Massasoit's own son, a man named Metacomet, the English called him King Philip, who led a massive attack on Plymouth. He was fighting back against what he called his father's unequal treaty. And that sparked a horrific, devastating war that just ripped through the entire region. Which brings us right back to where we began this whole story. It's this incredible domino effect, isn't it? From a king meeting a son, to a new church, to a persecuted group of people just trying to find freedom. But their quest for their own religious liberty ended up leading directly to the displacement of and violent conflict with the people whose land they now called home. And it leaves us with a really tough question to think about. How did a journey that began as a search for one kind of freedom end up creating a brand new and deeply tragic form of inequality?